Before you this evening is an item for the proposal of adoption of the 2012 International Building Code and International Existing Building Code. Some of the reasons to adopt the current code standards are that they are minimum in nature and that they primarily concern, their primary concern are the structural integrity and fire and life safety. The interior environment and energy efficiency designs are for health and affordability. Local amendments do allow for our jurisdiction to address local issues and provide clarifications for purpose of the minimum code standards, as well as the property insurance rates are directly affected by the codes that we adopt and how we implement those. Our current list of adopted city codes are basically the 2009 International Family of Codes, as well as the 2003 Uniform Plumbing Code and the 2008 National Electrical Code. Code development is a process that's kind of circular in nature, beginning with individual citizens, concerned contractors can propose code amendments, as well as the city ourselves can propose code amendments. Those go through the International Code Council, which is made up of various members throughout the nation, and they go through hearings, through committees, and go through a voting process on what codes are amended or adopted on the international level and then proposed through the states and cities. The requirements for the state of Idaho is that any local jurisdiction with permitting programs are required to adopt the additions that are adopted by the state of Idaho. Under the Idaho Code, Title 39, Chapter 41, any amending processes require a public hearing and notice to several organizations that are interested in code application. Excuse me. The City of Moscow is amending the 2012 edition of the International Building Code with proposed amendments from the Building Code Advisory Committee. The Building Code Advisory Committee for the city is made up of several local contractors, design professionals, as well as a council representative and city staff. The significant amendments that are being proposed this evening that were considered and thoroughly discussed by the Building Code Advisory Committee are first to eliminate foster care facilities as an institutional occupancy. Next would be to allow for additional types of sprinkler systems for specific occupancies. Then we're going to provide specific address numbering standards for emergency services. We're going to specify access clearances around equipment rooms for fire pumps and risers. We're also going to provide clarification for the floor area of upholstered furniture manufacturing, storage, and display. We're going to look at providing carbon monoxide alarm installation standards. We will specify minimum load design standards for unsupported balconies. These are all outlined in the proposed ordinance. And the state of Idaho has provided for 2 amendments that are also outlined in the ordinance with modifications to 2 footnotes in a table in Chapter 29. There were no significant changes to the International Building Code proposed by the State of Idaho or the City of Moscow Building Advisory Committee. Staff recommendations are to conduct a public hearing and, upon consideration of any testimony, approve the proposed ordinance under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings and that it be read by title and published by summary. I'm open to any questions from Councilman.
Walter? Michael, if you would back up, I think 2 or 3 slides to the...
Sir.
Yeah, nope, there.
Okay.
Down, 3rd bullet from the bottom, is this proposing that carbon monoxide alarms be installed in new construction or not, or what?
Under the proposal, it actually will read that carbon monoxide alarms in new and existing Group I and R occupancies located with a building that's containing a fuel-burning appliance or a building that has an attached garage where a permit is required for additions, remodels, or gas mechanical work shall be equipped with single-station carbon monoxide detectors. So, to answer your question more clearly, is if someone comes in to pull a permit for addition, remodel, or fuel gas mechanical appliance work, they will be required to install a carbon monoxide alarm.
And if I may?
Go ahead.
And that alarm would be required to be to a central station or anything? It would be like a smoke alarm in your house?
Similar
An
nature.
audible alarm for the occupants?
An audible alarm for the occupants. Single-station alarm, as defined, is going to be, it's not interconnected, and it's just the one individual device that's operational within the structure.
Okay, and
I
have one more on the
I
list.
just have a follow-up to what you just
okay,
asked.
go ahead.
So that would include, for instance, these type of carbon monoxide alarms that we can buy that we just plug into an outlet?
Yes, sir.
Those would be acceptable?
Yes, sir.
Other questions for Micah? Walter?
Under the foster care item, eliminating foster care facilities as an institutional occupancy, can you tell me what the thinking is there?
Under the definition in institutional occupancies, there's a discussion about the number of fostered individuals. As for an institutional occupancy, that would be 5 or more persons. So under that, if an individual residential occupancy had 6 foster care individuals that they're housing, as the code would read, they would be considered an I occupancy and be required to install standards to an I occupancy instead of an R occupancy, which is the residential standard.
And this change that you're proposing that we approve tonight would do what?
Would eliminate the foster care facility from that requirement being to eliminate foster care facilities that exceed that number of occupants.
So 6 or more, they would not apply?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Micah? Thank you, Micah. We'll officially open the public hearing, and if anybody would like to come up and make comments, general comments or whatever, come on up, sir. State your name, address, if you would, even though we all know who you are, David.
Starting to worry David was not going to say anything tonight.
Well, I wasn't planning on saying anything, but since this foster care facilities thing came
Excuse me,
up...
David, you need to identify yourself and your address for the record.
David Pierce, 716 East F Street.
Thank you, David.
Since this foster care facilities thing came up, and it's only, as I understood what he said, cover when you have 6 or more people under foster care in a facility. It seems to me that at that point, you're taking care of a very large number of people, and although it wasn't said, I think this would put them back to having to have no more than any requirements that went with residents. And that doesn't seem to me like it's taking care of these people who are in foster care very well. I don't think that's a very good idea to change that, because you're talking about having so many people who are being taken care of. Thank you.
Could we have additional testimony out there? And then we'll try to answer a question here. No additional testimony. I will close it. Gary, you had a question you wanted to say or a point you wanted to make?
No, sir. I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Walter?
Michael? I'm pretty sure you were not here when the committee did their work in 2012.
Unfortunately, no, sir.
And Sue Scott, the council liaison to that committee, is not here. Can you speak to the why, maybe, I don't know if Bill sat in on it, the why of eliminating the foster care requirement?
Bill?
If I may, I think my understanding of that amendment was to modify a section of the code that refers to those type of institutional uses that are caring for 5 or fewer persons, and to eliminate foster care facilities from that list. And Micah can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a section of the code, and it's actually in the draft ordinance on page, I get to the bottom of the page 3 of 11, that reads section 308.4.1, 5 or few persons receiving care.
It's the other way around.
Correct.
Okay.
So what I think the concern from the Building Code Advisory Committee was, if somebody was fostering 3 children, they didn't want them to be considered to be a foster care facility and have to put a sprinkler system in, because it was not of something of a magnitude of an institutional use if you're providing care for that larger number of foster children.
Right.
So I think that was really the intent of the amendment. Now, it may not actually be necessary because a foster care facility is actually defined as providing care for more than 5, I believe.
Correct.
So it's kind of an oddity in the code that they actually even put it in the list, because if you were caring for fewer than 5, then I think technically you're not a foster care facility underneath the way the building code definitions work. But I think the Building Code Advisory Committee wanted to make it sure that somebody who was fostering fewer than 5 children wouldn't get caught into this interpretation and be required to put in a fire suppression system. That was, I believe, the intent. Mike, please correct me if that's
That's correct. It
wrong.
was more of a clarification on
Makes sense.
almost conflicting areas of the code.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Micah. Dan?
I would like to make a motion that we approve this ordinance under suspension of the rules, require 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
And Tom, second. Okay, we have a motion by Dan to approve this with the suspension of the rules, requiring 3 complete and separate readings, that it can be read, entitled, but published, and by summary. Seconded by Tom. I will start with John.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay, and it passed 6-0. Very good. We'll move on to the next thing. Thank you, Micah.
Your Honor, you
I'm
need
sorry.
to take the number and read it by title, sir.
Okay. Ordinance 2014-01, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code Title 7, Chapters 1 and 12, adopting the 2012 edition of the International Building Code and the International Existing Building Code, with minor amendments to each, providing that provision of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.